I'm here with Julie Manning, Amanda Chang, and Tobias Lindquist. Julie is our global head of climate and carbon strategy. We've just released our report on the value of green entitled, What is the Value of Green? Looking at the evidence linking sustainability and real estate outcomes. Julie, what is the value of green? What do we mean by that term?
Yeah, I'll say three things. First, when we're making capital allocation decisions, we need to understand how and whether green building features will drive value or protect value. Secondly, anecdotal evidence is great, but we're also in search of the hard facts to underpin that analysis. And thirdly, we struggle with that green premium and brown discount language that we often hear so much in our industry. A given green building feature can offer a premium early on due to the scarcity in the market, whereas its value declines as that feature becomes more standard. And so, Tobias, you developed a framework to illustrate this. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah. So again, this is sort of to remind that this is a meta study on the value of green in the industry. And for such a study to be undertaken, they need to rely on well-defined attributes to correctly isolate their effects on rents and values. And those same attributes, that they are the attributes that occupiers, developers, and investors need to consider as well. So if we go back a few years and we look at LED lights, for example, in the early 2000s, they were first made available, and they resulted in energy savings and better longevity. This allowed early adopters to differentiate their buildings in a market where LED was not commonplace. But if we look at the present day, we see that LED, they're standard now, and they can't really be used as a differentiating factor, and therefore a premium cannot be driven, and you can't measure its presence in a market where it's so commonplace that pretty much every building has it. Now today, instead, we can look at properties in buildings, and they can differentiate themselves with things like certificates. We're talking like BREEAM or LEED certificates. And these are really common distinguishing factors in value of green studies that tend to show a very clear connection to both rent and price premiums. But then if we look ahead, we see that attributes that result in increased value, whether it be from legislative, occupier, or investor demand, they'll become more commonplace and widely adopted. That also means that new initiatives for greener built environment will drive markets to evolve and set new standards over time. And that is what is really driving the value of green. So with this framework, we really look to highlight this point, that what is driving green value in real estate varies over time. And the value of certain attributes, they'll start initially being low as the awareness is low, but they'll come to increase over time with increased demand and awareness. And eventually, for a specific attribute, the relative value will decline as it's become standard, really, for a core asset.
That's great. Thank you, Tobias. Let's turn to you, Amanda. What evidence did we find to support this? Can you tell us how we reviewed the available studies?
Yeah, so if we take a step back, there is a vast selection of available studies currently in the market. So we had to envision what an ideal study should embody as a sort of a guide. If we break it up systematically, it should actually contain three broad categories. First, it should be able to isolate the impact of green features. In order to differentiate if an asset's value premium was attributed to the green feature or simply because it was new, other factors needed to be controlled in the study. These include features such as age, building specification, and location. Secondly, we knew that there was more than one way in which the value of green could exist. The benefit of green features could vary in different aspects of a building's performance, such as rents, operating expenses, and occupancy rate. Lastly, the framework and key takeaways of our LaSalle study should facilitate investment-making decisions. So we screened the input and methodologies of 41 studies conducted by various academic institutions and market researchers to provide us with confidence that the outputs are meaningful. This framework essentially works like a filtering funnel that enables us to make more informed decisions.
So, Amanda, were all of the studies focused on rent premia and capital values, or were there some of the other findings as well?
Majority of the collated studies were primarily focused on rent premia and capital values. That being said, we acknowledge there are other accretive value drivers from green capital investments, such as high occupancy and lower downtime. However, there are limited data currently available in terms of these. Hence, we have opted to introduce a tracking system to build a more holistic database. As the value of green becomes more prevalent in the market, we expect studies to become more sophisticated and offer nuances through a wider spectrum of measurements.
So, Julie, we reviewed all of these studies, and there's a lot of data points from the literature on the value of green. What are the takeaways? What are the key takeaways? What did we learn?
Yeah, I think we learned a lot, and we did document that in our paper, a number of the findings. Three that I'll highlight here. First, hard evidence that is up to date is a challenge to find in a rapidly evolving market, as all these studies are backward looking. Secondly, while the evidence varies widely, all of the studies showed a positive value of green. And then lastly, investors should really monitor the movement of the value of green, as it will vary over time and at different times across property types and locations. So while you don't want to fall behind the curve, you also need to be aware of how far ahead of the curve you may be.
Well, Julie, Tobias, Amanda, thanks for joining me today to discuss this new report about the value of green. If you want to read more, please go to the Insight section of LaSalle.com, where you can read the full report. And as Amanda said, we will continue to be tracking new evidence and new studies that cover this very important topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.